And I'm a being recorded. I'm a community researcher at the Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG. PPG is a community-based think tank. We have over 300 partner groups. Those range from small block clubs to larger nonprofits to for-profit groups. Really, any kind of group we invite to be our partner. And our mission is to provide research and policy advocacy assistance to those partners to advance policy change at the local and state level. And today we are happy to welcome you to an informational session about the City of Buffalo's new proactive rental inspection program. And we'll be talking about what led to this program, how it works, and what landlords need to know. So before we dive in, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat. We have quite a few people here, and it's always really helpful to get a sense of where people are coming from. If you're affiliated with an organization or group, if you want to throw that in the chat or anything else you want us to know. Second, this meeting is being recorded for folks who aren't able to make it today. So just wanted to let people know about that. And last, we do have another upcoming workshop later this week. It's very similar to this one about the proactive rental inspections program, but this one will be about the impact on tenants. So that's this Thursday, October 7th, 12 to 1:30, pretty much the same program, just a little bit more geared toward tenants. Folks can register at that link. They can also go on our Facebook page. It's one of our events, so you can find more information there. But please feel free to pass that along to folks who might be interested in that. We have a great group of speakers joining us today who are coming from various perspectives on this issue. So we'll go through and introduce them. So first we'll have Fillmore District Council member Mitch Nowakowski. We will also have Andrea, who is the Executive Director at PPG. We have Hunter Spitzer, who's an AmeriCorps Vista to the City of Buffalo Department of Permits and Inspections. We also have Anthony Williams, who's the Healthy Housing Coordinator at City Neighborhoods. We also have a couple of folks from the Inspections Department helping to answer questions about the Proactive Rental Inspection Program. Those folks being Michael Ramos, who is the Lead Hazard Control Outreach Educational Specialist, and Tom Bradford, who's the Assistant Director of that department. As far as our agenda today, we're going to start out with just some information on what led us to this policy. So we'll hear from Councilman Nowakowski on what he was hearing from his constituents and what led him to be a real leader in making this policy happen. We'll also hear from Andrea about how PPG got involved and our support for it. Then we will get into the nuts and bolts of the PRI program. So Hunter will be letting us know how it works, what the process is, what landlords need to know, and what happens post-inspection. Then we will also have a little section on repair resources for landlords. Following that, we'll have a longer section for questions and discussion, but we invite you to put questions in the chat throughout the program. During presentations, it's totally fine. Andrea and I will be monitoring the chat. So if we see one that might be easy to answer during the presentation, we'll lift those up to the presenters. Otherwise, we may hang on to some till the end, but we'll be tracking all of them. So please just put them in as they come to mind. With that, that is the end of my introduction here. So I'd like to pass it off to Councilman Nowakowski.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. It's really great to be with you here today. Lead poisoning and this lead policy is something that's really important to me, and it was one of the things that I had worked on right when I was elected to the Buffalo Common Council. Out of Buffalo's 3 highest zip codes of lead poisoning, 2 are found within the Fillmore district, and they are in the areas of Broadway Fillmore, in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods that I represent. And a lot of the properties that are cited for lead poisoning are rentals, and especially rentals to folks in those neighborhoods that don't have the financial capacity to own their own home. So what I found was a lot of the folks that were and their children that were getting poisoned were the most vulnerable folks here in the city of Buffalo. And I knew that we had to do something about it, but luckily right when I got on the Common Council, the city of Buffalo and Anna Falikoff and the law department had already been working on it extensively, but it needed to be passed and ratified by the Buffalo Common Council. And it was funny. Serendipity does happen yesterday. I had a call to my office and a very angry person that did not live in my district, and said that I'm very upset that Councilman Nowakowski sponsored this legislation because I think it's a backdoor policy to get inspectors into homes. And I own several homes in the Fillmore district, and not only was I cited for lead, but I was cited for other violations. And I think this is a money grab, which I gladly took that call and let him know that I will would sponsor legislation like that over and over again, because my constituents, no matter and regardless of their income, should not be spending their income in rent to live in a property or a dwelling that has multiple violations, especially lead exposure, which, as we know, why we're all here, is lead exposure is something that once you get it, you cannot come back from it. It has irreversible and permanent damage, especially to young folks, that it affects. And as Kara would say from the Lead Safety Task Force, is there's no amount of lead in someone's bloodstream that is okay. And this is a problem, and it's affecting the most vulnerable populations here in the city of Buffalo with the housing stock that we do have. And the proactive rental registration, from its genesis, accomplishes a few things. It gets inspectors into homes to make sure that they're inspecting for lead. It's also making sure that we get the proper information of landlords onto our rental registry. So multiple times, whenever I read the Buffalo News, especially on a weekend, it says there was a fire at, or a fight at, or a shooting at, or something happening at the dwelling, our emergency services don't know who owns the property or have any contact information to be able to reach out to that person that something very serious happened at their property. So that adequate information and it being uploaded for city services is super important to the fire department, Buffalo Police, and inspections when something happens at that property in general, but especially when it comes to violations. And a lot of the folks in my district, when this had passed, we had done a good job of going to block clubs, and Michael Ramos has done a wonderful job, making himself available from food drives to backpack drives to block clubs, and to other very kind of organic ways in the neighborhood, to talk to folks about why this is important and why that every property, whether you own it or live in it, needs to be inspected for lead. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of constituents were more apprehensive of having someone inside their home and inspecting, and that's it can feel very invasive and hard to understand. But once that adequate information is presented and shown to constituents that this is really just to make sure that you're safe and that your children are safe, folks are more likely to open up their doors to inspectors to come in and to do routine, to do just a routine check, and that it's not punitive. And I think that's the other thing that's really important in the legislation part is, I want my constituents to feel safe to call 311 and reach out to inspections regarding their dwelling, because it's not punitive if your landlord is cited for lead, and that there are, a whole lead safety task force and a lot of people on this call that have worked to make sure that if there is lead, the biggest thing is we want it remediated. I think someone from the lead safety task force one time said in a call was that there is, by design or by nature or by virtue, we don't want to penalize or punish anybody. We just want lead remediated. That's the end. That's the end goal. And I think that it's important for everyone to know, from landlords to tenant, is the main objective is to remediate lead, to not be punitive. But I don't want to be too long-winded. There's a lot of wonderful speakers, and I thank you for the time of letting me on this call, and so that I can kind of show from the councilmanic level and from a council member's perspective is it's my duty to make sure that I represent people to live in health and safety homes in all facets of the matter, and especially when there are tools in City Hall like our inspections department to make sure that happens. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councilman. Of course, we really appreciate your leadership on this, and we really appreciate you joining us today to give your take. Next, we'll have Andrea Suilleabhain, again, from Partnership for the Public Good, to talk about our involvement in this.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks to you all for joining, and thanks to Councilmember Nowakowski, I think, for already highlighting some of the complexities that were in the mix as we all work together toward this program. I want to look back a few years. In 2017, the city, the Community Foundation, and many other partners released the Renewing Our Pledge report, which was really a map for how to and lead poisoning of Buffalo's children. And the first, some of the major findings were that Erie County had one of the highest blood level testing rates in New York State. At that time, 61% of children were testing for high lead levels in their first few years. Also really interesting that lead exposure levels had really plateaued at that time. So despite many interventions and all kinds of education and outreach efforts and programs, the rate was no longer decreasing. It had really stagnated at that point. Another finding, of course, was that the majority of children with elevated blood lead levels were living in the city of Buffalo, and that they were living in singles and doubles. An important finding for this session geared toward our landlords today was that they weren't just in properties from big landlords, from out of town landlords. They were from properties owned by 1,200 different property owners. So that really showed, I think, a lot of our community partners the need to work with landlords, the need to see that this is an issue for small landlords who own just one or two buildings, for what we sometimes call mom and pop landlords, folks who inherited a property and were running it as a rental property. And importantly, 80% at the time of the properties where children had harmful lead levels were rentals. And so it really pointed to those rentals, those single and doubles, as a key source of lead exposure. The top recommendation in that report, there were many recommendations, but the first one listed was to require owners of all rental housing to pass an interior inspection for lead paint every 3 years after this initial 6-year phase-in period for inspecting singles and doubles. So it really highlighted the need for these proactive interior inspections. And of course, we're very grateful that in the years since, the city has moved forward with this recommendation. We began at that time working with some of our partners with support from the Community Foundation and other funders with Healthy Homes work. And I want to name those partners, which were Connect and the Community Health Worker Network, Heart of the City Neighborhoods, Ujima Theater Company, Buffalo Prenatal Perinatal, Push Buffalo, and others. And we began this coalition work to really understand, why wasn't lead exposure decreasing more? What were those lasting barriers? And so we did interviews with many tenants. We interviewed landlords. We interviewed pediatricians who were dealing with lead exposed children, teachers, housing court judges, folks from permits and inspections, really trying to see, again, why wasn't progress happening? And in the meantime, we've done many interim projects and recommendations, things like sharing out in neighborhoods with high lead levels, 4 simple steps to a healthy home. What can tenants do for themselves? We've worked with community health workers to share this information at parent groups, at all sorts of community meetings. Throughout that time, this core recommendation, though, really stayed with us of, we're not going to see the type of progress we need without this proactive interior inspection program. And Anna Falikoff from the City Law Department, who's also on with us today, really researched extensively, how do these programs work in other cities, both nearby, like Rochester, where they have required inspections for singles and doubles for many years, and further afield as well, other cities that have these programs. And building off of the work of Anna and others in the city, again, we're grateful that then council members, including Mitch Nowakowski and David Rivera, really took up the need for this and championed passing these ordinance amendments to make the program possible. Since this has passed, our community partners have really continued their work to ensure that this program works for both landlords and tenants. And it's become not only about reducing lead exposure, but really about improving overall housing conditions in the long term, working together to bring healthier housing stock to Buffalo. And again, really recognizing there was a whole other arm of the project where the Community Foundation and partners brought together, I think, around 40 landlords to work on how could landlords come together and address lead exposure. What do they really need? What resources are required? And so another point for us of this program is really to connect landlords, especially those small landlords, to the resources that they need to make these repairs, to make these conditions changes possible. And I know we'll hear more about that today as well. So that's kind of our community-based organization history of how we got here, and I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea. Now we have the meat of the program. Hunter is going to be talking about the kind of nuts and bolts of the program. So he'll be sharing his screen here. I'm going to try to spotlight him as well. All right, off to you, Hunter.
Thank you, Sarah. As previously mentioned, my name is Hunter Spitzer. I'm the AmeriCorps Vista to the Department of Permits and Inspections. And for the past year, I've been working with the department and a variety of other departments in City Hall to put this program together and implement this legislation that was passed last November. So pictured here, you can see some of our inspectors working out in the field, and I'll get into more about what we're going to do with this program. So a little bit of background for you. The rental registry, which is a registry of non-owner occupied 1- and 2-family properties, has been around since 2005. This is what Mitch Nowakowski was mentioning when he discussed needing to have contact information for property owners when things happen at the property where they need to be involved, code violations, emergencies, things of that nature. And this is located in Chapter 264 of the City Code. This consolidates the majority of the city's rental units, and these are generally the properties that are in the worst condition. These are the properties where lead poisoning is most likely to occur. One of the major priorities of this program is health and safety, and that obviously includes lead poisoning. In November of 2020, the Common Council unanimously passed an amendment to Chapter 264, which requires the inspection of all rental registry properties in the city. And that's what a lot of people have been mentioning. I've included a picture here of the 2020 Property Maintenance Code of New York State. This is the code that is we enforce all of the building codes of New York State, but this is the one that most commonly affects existing properties. Generally, any violation you receive is out of this maintenance code. So if you're not familiar with it and you are working in property maintenance or anything like that, or if you're curious, this would be the first place to look. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, obviously, and I will respond to them as we go. So that being the background, what are the goals of this program? And these are the goals that were identified by the Common Council in the legislation that passed: protecting the neighborhood character and stability, protecting the public health and preventing childhood lead poisoning, improving housing conditions by enforcing minimum housing standards, and take action against negligent owners. And so what do I mean by improving housing conditions and taking action against negligent health owners? I feel like these are the ones that people are probably most concerned about. So the minimum housing standards are those listed in the Property Maintenance Code, and those are what we're going to be inspecting for. These are not limited just to lead paint, despite what you might be thinking. This is the full property, and we're really looking to make sure properties are up to standard for health and safety. We're not going to be making sure properties are perfect. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for substantial compliance. And when I say a negligent owner, I don't mean a person who owns a couple of properties and is struggling with how to improve them. I mean a person who doesn't respond to our department at all, whether they get a letter of violation, whether they are contacted for scheduling an inspection to begin with. I don't mean, or people who outright refuse to make repairs. It's not people who are in contact with us and trying and showing a good faith effort to maintain their properties. So what rental housing is included in this program? It's the homes that are on the rental registry. Those are 1- and 2-family homes that are not owner occupied. We've launched this program in areas with a history of childhood lead poisoning, and specifically areas where there's a grant available for lead-based remediation. Currently, we're in the Upper West Side neighborhood, and we'll be going to Schiller Park after that. But this will encompass the entire city in the coming years. So everyone who owns a 1- and 2-family home as a rental property will be affected by this program. So how does this program start? We start with a letter to the landlord. These are sent out based on the contact information of the rental registry. You need to respond to this letter within 10 days to schedule your proactive rental inspection. You can do so by calling our department or 311 or by visiting our online bookings portal. For the record, these methods of scheduling, particularly the booking portal, are only if you've already received a letter. If you haven't received a letter, that means you're not in one of our priority neighborhoods. And you can, of course, begin to participate in this program before then, but we request that you call separately. Following the letter to the landlord, we also send a letter to the occupants of the building to inform them about the program and information regarding housing resources. About 2 weeks after all these letters have gone out and everyone has had a chance to at least receive them and respond if they're going to, we proceed to canvass the neighborhood that have received these letters, particularly to follow up on properties where owners failed to respond. If you've already scheduled your inspection, generally we'll still visit and leave a bag, but we're not as intentional in trying to make contact with the occupants, because this program, the goal is to inspect the interior of every rental property, because just because someone didn't respond doesn't mean we're going to neglect them. So block walks. This is our canvassing approach. This is a picture here from the first block walk we did last month. It is a one-on-one approach for residents in the priority neighborhood to meet the inspectors on their porch. And it's an opportunity for occupants to schedule the interior inspection for a future date. And sometimes we will conduct interior inspections on that day. We additionally will have additional partners there to provide health services and housing services like rent relief, to connect people with the resources that they need to make their housing better. So what are we inspecting? Obviously a big question. And as I mentioned, it's the property maintenance code. This is a very dense checklist, and I don't expect anybody to be taking notes on this. It is available on our website. If you go to the Department of Permits Inspections at buffalo.newyork.gov, and I'll have a link in that at the end. But this generally describes everything that we will look at on the property. It's very brief and it's dense, but this is the gist of it. And so what happens if the property fails the first inspection, right? What happens if we find some of these issues on the property? The most common ones being smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, porches and stairs being incomplete or damaged, windows, and I'd like to say accumulation of garbage. An order to remedy will be sent to the owner listing the violations that were found on the property. Generally, the owner needs to respond to this letter within 30 days. 30 days after that first inspection, we'll return for a second inspection. And at this inspection, there's an expectation that you have some sort of progress to show, whether that means you can show that you've entered into a loan, right? Or you submit an application for a loan, or you've made some of the first initial repairs or done some sort of remediation, or you're signed up for a lead remediation class, either with the county or a private group. If you are a landlord who is planning to do lead-based remediation on your own, you need to get certified with the renovation and repair program provided by the EPA, so that you know how to properly handle lead-based paint, and they don't spread lead-based paint to other properties in your neighborhood or throughout your units. And after the second inspection, we will come back again 30 days later. And the expectation is that the inspection will be the last one, right? Hopefully, this will be approximately 90 days after the first letter goes out, that the property will be in substantial compliance. Obviously, if you have not reached substantial compliance in that time, you have either a contract for a loan, further time may be granted for reasonable delays. And so obviously the next question is, what is a reasonable delay? I'll pause briefly to see the chat. How does the city of Buffalo know what properties are rentals when not everyone registers with the rental registry? With the rental registry incomplete, what will be done to ensure enforcement? We are actively working to update the rental registry, and we would expect to be sending out fresh letters next year that will address these properties who have avoided the rental registry. Obviously, we are aware that there is a deficit with the rental registry, and we are going to be seeking to follow up with those who have been avoiding it. And another question is, this information is entered into the Hansen system. How can the public know the progress has been taken by the landlord? And I will respond to that question a little bit later. Got 2 letters. I'm going to continue. So what are reasonable delays? You're waiting for a loan or a grant. You have a contract with the contractor, but obviously there's a contractor shortage. So if perhaps your contract date is a few months out, as long as you submit that as evidence, we will wait until then for your next inspections. And of course, this is the city of Buffalo, so weather is a pretty regular issue when trying to make repairs. And these are all reasonable delays, but they all require documentation, an intent letter, a work plan, a signed contract with the city of Buffalo licensed contractor. These are examples of that will support your reasonable delay. Negligence is when you ignore attempts for contact, whether it be the letters that we send out, the block walk notice and door knockers, and the exterior violation letter. And the longer you wait to respond, the greater the consequences that could occur with no evidence of sincere attempts at compliance. So, now, what happens if you've been negligent after the third inspection? Because regardless of whether or not you respond, we will make 3 attempts to reach the property owner. We'll make 3 attempts to contact the tenant and to see what is going on at the property. But if at this point the owner is negligent, the owner will be sent a summons for a hearing with the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication. And this is an administrative hearing. And at this hearing, the officer may issue a notice of noncompliance against the property if a good faith agreement is not met, or if the owner does not respond. And once this is issued, the owner is restricted from operating the building as rental property, and tenants cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent if you have been issued this notice. And obviously, this is something we want to avoid. We're not interested really in pursuing enforcement. We don't want to penalize property owners who are making good faith efforts. And if you're making good faith efforts, this won't happen. This is specifically for people who don't respond or can't be, or who are ignoring our responses. So we had some questions. Can people in the neighborhood see what property is in the rental registry and make sure properly we know is registered? You can view the rental registry online. If you go to our website at the Permits of Inspection City of Buffalo, there's a public data page with a link to the rental registry. You can also find it by going to the City of Buffalo Open Data website and searching for rental registry. So that's what happens if a property fails, but we obviously don't want that to happen every time, and eventually the property will pass. So when they do pass, you'll be issued a certificate of rental compliance. And this is valid for 3 years, and that it certifies the property was in substantial compliance with building codes on the date issued. And this is the big benefit for landlords. This is really what you're paying for when you pay into the rental registry. This is a certificate that shows that your property is up to code, right? You don't have a lead-based paint violation or paint violation. You have safe stairs, you have a safe property that's fit for habitability by residents and tenants. And so these are the benefits of the new approach, right? In this process, we're going to be working to connect small and responsible landlords to public resources. We have a lot of resources for small landlords at this time, which we'll get into briefly after this. But this creates a new, affordable, and efficient renovation standard amongst contracting community for the long term, right? We are setting an expectation that these properties are going to need to be more maintained on a more regular basis. And importantly, this addresses blight, which is a pretty large issue in a lot of parts of the city and often happens at these rental properties where someone has been renting them out to tenants and avoiding maintaining them because of the standard landlord-tenant complex. And so this certificate of rental compliance, if it demonstrates that your property was in compliance, and so if someone causes damages to your property, you have evidence of your previous quality. And it also would restrict the market participation of substandard landlords. So once we inspect them and issue the notice of non-compliance, we can, in theory, they're not allowed to operate as a rental property. So now I'll pause here to introduce Anthony Williams from the Heart of the City Neighborhoods to go over some of the public housing resources we have. And I think perhaps pause for questions as well. So I don't think there have been any more. So Anthony.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anthony Williams from Heart of the City. I'm the Healthy Homes Coordinator here. And I'm just going to talk about one of our programs that's helped some of our smaller landlords, what we consider our mom and pops landlords. We have actually a fund called the Anti-Displacement Learning Network that assists landlords in their properties and low-income families that's in their properties to deal with health and safety issues in their homes. We right now are assisting people in the Ellicott District, Maston, and Niagara District. And that covers a great deal of area in the city of Buffalo. Along with that, we take care of some of the small home repairs. And keep in mind, we're trying to make sure the home is healthy and safe of any hazards of lead or anything like that, so that the tenant can live in a safe environment and also be able to keep the community upgraded where they live at. Now, when it comes to the landlords, there are certain qualifications that you do need to meet. One of them is that you do need to own the property. You do need to be caught up on your taxes and obligations and fees with the city of Buffalo and Erie County. We will require that the tenant have lit or the required income of the tenant, and that their gross household income is not above the 80% means of income. One of the things that the program does that you should also know about is it really assists you in those troubled areas where you want to get your house up to standard. And so we look forward for some of these landlords to give us a call, as people have already, to see what we can do to assist, to stabilize the homes in the community. Like I said, there are requirements. The landlord does not have to be under any type of income requirements, but it is important that they do know that if they own too many different properties, it kind of, they fall out the program. But we, as much as possible, do as much as we can so that the standard of living is well. So that's all I have. If there's any questions, you mark them down and I'll try to assist as much as possible.
Maybe we can go back to a couple of the questions just to
I
make
just want to, Sarah, if you don't mind, jump in terms of other resources. I think Anna Falikoff from the City Law Department can also share with us for a moment about the lead grant that the city has to provide resources, and work also on the revolving loan fund that has been set up alongside this program.
Thanks, Andrea. Well, I see here on the slide, we have that for your information. The city did receive a $2 million lead grant to assist landlords in making their home lead safe. We're currently able to spend those dollars in the Upper West Side neighborhood and Schiller Park neighborhoods. Like Anthony's program, there are some restrictions, but there's up to $12,000 in grant dollars potentially available to help with lead. We also have a new product, thanks to the Community Foundation and local banks and the City of Buffalo. Here it is. Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. Of a low interest, well, it's essentially low interest when you add a grant to it, loan for small landlords. There's up to 20% of the loan will be a grant. Fewer restrictions for this pot of money, no income qualifications. But the repairs do need to be focused on health and safety. There's information here on how to inquire more about this grant, loan grant opportunity. But as stated by Hunter and previous presenters, we're really eager to get these resources into small landlords' hands. So we are available to answer any questions and help people through that eligibility process. That's it. Thank you.
I see Mike answered a question here about the Hansen system. Mike, do you want to unmute and mention and kind of talk through that? I see it's a bit of a long answer, so maybe talking through it will be a little bit more clear.
Hi. So yeah, just in regards to the Hansen information and what happens during what happens after an inspection is that all the violations, all the notes are being inputted on the Hansen. All that information could be foiled at the requester of the renter, but the best suggestions we can give is that a renter or tenant at the time of the inspection communicates with the building inspector. They're very friendly. They have had community health worker training as well, so they are very cognizant of the population they're serving. And during that time, we have expressed that they should be willing to share the information and updates that's happening. And we would like to hear from the tenant as well if there's been any updates on the violations that were found, or if they've any work has been started or not, so we can put a little bit more pressure on landlords that are not trying to comply with the violations that have been found. So, yeah, just the inspectors are instructed to give out their business cards at every inspection or on request. So that we're very transparent when it comes to the work we're doing and how we're following up with it. In regards to, there's another question here. Sorry. So Anna, maybe we can speak on that, or I think Aaron Mickles is on the call as well. If a property fails inspection and the owner does not take steps to remediate on the city issue, and the city issues a certificate of non-compliance, what mechanisms does the city have to enforce the landlord not rent the property, and how does the city assist affected tenants with relocating if they are displaced. In that aspect, the Bureau of Administration and Adjudication has been created in tandem with this legislation, and it's to serve as an extra mechanism before we address it to court to fulfill that void of inactivity that happens when courts get overwhelmed. And one way is the city can't, once they issued the certificate of non-compliance, the city can post that on the unit and enforce that with our inspectors. And on one of the mechanisms is the non-collection of rent, which the tenant will be informed about at the time if that were to occur. But the Office of the Bureau of Administration and Adjudication is set there as a pre-hearing stage where a landlord would be given the opportunity to do the work before we get to that stage and show good faith in that aspect. Hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Michael. I think before we go on to more questions, we'll send it back to Hunter to finish up the slideshow, and then we can stop screen sharing and answer a few more questions that way. Back to you, Hunter.
Thanks, Sarah. And so this is just a little bit more information. If you have questions about lead hazard assistance or other home repair programs, this is contact information for all of the urban development corporations in the city. And additionally, we have a link at the bottom of the screen here to our proactive rental inspections page for more information about the program itself. Additionally, I will display our website so you can see sort of what it looks like to get an idea of where to go. And you can see here on the side, we have information about proactive rental inspections here, rental registration in general here. So if you are a property owner who is not registered, you can apply at this point. And then public data. We've received some questions about how do we follow up on rental registry properties, unregistered properties, code violations. All of this information can be found here. Rental registry being here. If you click this link, it will take you to Open Data Buffalo, and you can use the search bar to find properties if they are registered and what status they are in. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thanks, Hunter. We can also send out those links in a follow-up email to everybody. So don't worry about, figuring out exactly what they are now. We'll send that over. So maybe, Hunter, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, perfect. Stop sharing so we can have a look at everybody. And I see a question here about tenant damages, or if there's illegal activity going on, unclean conditions, that kind of thing. How does that factor into this program?
Sure, I'll take this one. So obviously, once you've gotten the certificate of rental compliance, after an tenant does cause damages to your property, you will have clear evidence that you were in compliance before that date and that you won't be caught in that situation where it's your word against theirs. That's one of the big benefits for landlords to having this certificate. If damages are caused unfairly by the tenant, then it does become clear whose responsibility it is to repair them, and you have better grounds in a case of an eviction or what's the other word that they use when they go to small claims court. And additionally, if we get to a property, the building inspectors are aware that property maintenance is both the responsibility of the owner and the tenant. So there are cases where you find tenants who are hoarders and who are otherwise negatively affecting the property and the surrounding area. And in those situations, we will try to connect the tenant with other services and support the landlord in both repairing their side and maintaining their part of the property and encouraging the tenant to maintain their portion of property maintenance as well.
Thank you. And I know Andrea had pulled out a couple of questions as well, so she'll.
Yeah, I received a few questions from a participant as a direct message, which I think might just be clicking the different button in the chat. So one question was, how has permits and inspections kind of built the capacity to take this on, right? This is obviously a big undertaking for you all, so concerns about the capacity to take on this program. And then another question around going forward, it would be every 3 years, a re-inspection. This question is really, is that is that too long of a time frame? Is that a sensible time frame? So much can change. A property can go from good to bad quite quickly. So those are two questions for our city partners here.
Okay, it's Tom Broadfield here. So we've actually tried to think this through. We've had some dealings in the past using multiple dwelling inspections. This is going to be a process here. So with that understanding, we feel we have the current staff levels to not only begin the program, but to get through enough rental units and the, if you want to call them the phase 1 districts effectively. As this progresses through the city, and as added tasks are placed on our department, and I could go on a list of how many complaints come in and how many multiple dwelling inspections are needed, permits are coming in, but we're hoping that through the proactive rental inspection program, we will receive less complaints and therefore lessen the inspector's duties on them, maybe even receive less FOIL complaints that we have to follow up on or information. So it's a hope, being that we're just starting the program now, that there are going to be some bumps in it, and it's going to challenge our department, but we think we can move through it effectively at this time.
And I'll add to that a little bit. We are looking to improve the technology in the department. We've got a new scheduling portal that has taken off a lot of the burden of communication in the terms of the initial setup, so that landlords can schedule their first inspections online. We've also been doing a lot of work in our internal data management system to reduce redundancies and connect people more effectively to the information that they need to do their jobs.
I can answer the question on the 3-year period. You know, it's hard to say, you know, what the right period is, but we were balancing sort of our internal capacity with what we thought sort of the tolerance would be in the community as well, because you do need to arrange for the inspection, and it's as noted by the council member, it's an inconvenience potentially, so we didn't want it to be more regular than 3 years for those 2 reasons: capacity and sort of having to deal with the experience. And I'd say on average, it's pretty much in line with other cities, some of which have longer periods between inspections. But we felt that that was appropriate, particularly with in light of lead paint and the rate at which paint deteriorates. 3 years felt like a good amount of time.
If I may add as well, if that's okay. Sorry, Eric, I saw you unmuted really quick.
No, that's all right. Continue on.
Really quick, speaking on capacity, additionally, a big part of our approach on this phase 1 on the Upper West Side and Schuyler Park is the fact that there is federal dollars that need to be used up for these properties. They're set for those specific areas, and they're set to address the childhood lead poisoning there. And that's a big part of why we started there. We're developing our revolver loan fund right now. We have Anthony Williams there with a Heart of the City neighborhoods, and we have Stand Up Buffalo program. As these federal dollars keep increasing, our capacity is going to increase as well, because we don't just want to address a property, inspect it, and move on. We want to make sure those properties are getting fixed. We want to make sure tenants are living in a safe and healthy home. So, and additionally, we want to improve those communities. So, you know, we have Councilman Mitch Nowakowski here saying, you know, he's getting angry phone calls. Well, let's direct them to those grants that we have available for those areas where those properties are at. Let's just increase that flow of interest there. But I'll leave off the mic to you, Eric.
Thank you, Mike. Just to address the point of, you know, rapid changing in that 3-year period, yes, that's a long time to, you know, between inspections, but we do have a requirement that we put into the ordinance where, although the licenses are transferable, the property owner has to notify the city before about 30 days before transfer. So we are going to be aware when properties change hands, and, you know, if there are other flags, you know, there could be exacerbating circumstances that lead DPIS to act a little sooner if necessary.
Yeah, and did you have something, Andrea?
Yeah, just we've had a couple questions come in different perspectives around housing court. And I think the big question is kind of how does this fit with housing court? One participant wrote, of course, housing court is very behind due to COVID-19 closures and delays. Homeowners now being cited for violations or not being brought in. So really, I think to talk through with us, how does this connect if violations are documented, if repairs are slow, how will this fit with the housing court system?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. Basically, it's the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication that, if executed the way that we want it to be executed, will take roughly 95% of the housing court's docket away. So the cases that do end up in front of Judge Carney, our resident housing judge, it will be the most negligent and the landlords who have opted not to participate in our collaborative systems. And everyone else will be going through the BAA to be matched up with the resources that Hunter and our other community partners were discussing earlier.
Thank you. And I see a question here from Crystal. If a property owner fails to notify you that they intend to transfer a property, do you have another way that you are notified of a transfer?
So the Erie County Property Register is a good one. If a sale is recorded and we don't get a transfer notification on a property that we know is in the rental registration system, we're going to know about it. It's a red flag that will go up in our systems, and we will be able to inquire at that point.
Great. And I know that I had a question here around assistance in court if a tenant is, sounds like maybe damaging property. Do you feel like your question was answered in the chat, or did you have?
A bit. We had a landlord. She has a property, and the tenant was literally shooting up the house, bullet holes and everything. The city department of permits and inspections wrote her a letter of violations. We mailed them all the documentation proving the criminal damage and the police report, and then there was crickets. So with the eviction moratorium going on, I just wanted some clarification around that. But more to the point, as a real estate agent and a landlord myself, I would like to know more about this notification to the city. So let's say we're closing on a property, 123 Main Street, in a week. We have to let the city know that this rental property is being sold?
Yes, in a sense. When if there's an active rental registration and in the future an active CRC associated with that property, before it's transferred, the city has to be notified about it. It's not something that we are going to upvote or downvote. It's a basic notification. And as far as your other concerns with the tenants, both the most recent state law and our PRI ordinance allow evictions for tenants who cause that type of damage. If landlords are non-compliant with their CRC and renting the property anyway, and there's no tenant damage, then landlords are not going to be able to access housing court to evict for non-payment of rent. But even in that scenario, if there is damage, such as shooting through walls, non-compliance with CRC notwithstanding, the property owner will be able to evict that tenant because it becomes a more urgent safety issue.
Okay, and just one last follow-up. Are you notifying BNR, Buffalo Niagara Association of Realtors, about the changes so that they can let all the agents know?
Yeah, we've been in communication with the president a little bit, but I think it would be useful to do an actual presentation with them as well. Thanks for that's a good suggestion.
Okay, I told a lot of agents and they weren't happy about the changes, so I just figured you might want to get ahead of it.
Sounds good. Are there other questions? I know people have been putting them in the chat. I haven't seen any new ones recently, but if if someone has a question and you just want to unmute to ask your question, please feel free to do that.
What does CRC stand for exactly again?
That's the certificate of rental compliance. It's the documents that's issued after the property has passed an interior inspection with the city. Again, they're valid for 3 years, at which time the property would need to be re-inspected to get a valid certificate of rental compliance.
I have a question too. My name is Simon, and I live in a 2-family house myself, and I rent my lower unit. So in my case, how would one of these inspections work? Would they be inspecting it, or would they not be inspecting it? Although would they be inspecting just like the lower unit that I rent out? How would it work for people like me?
Are you the owner, Simon?
I am the owner, yeah.
So you're completely excluded from this current policy, current law. If you're owner occupied unit, you wouldn't even get a letter. And if you do, just let us know. But if you'd like to get the unit inspected as something, as a precaution to yourself, and you feel like your tenants can
Oh, well, I guess my bigger thing would be like if I got to inspect, because I do have work I want to do in the house, and I do need help with financing a lot of this stuff. Does it make me any more eligible for grant programs, or no? It would just basically be an inspection that's like code enforced, and I need to be doing it by the rule of the law type deal. Like it wouldn't help me as far as applying for any programs to help.
So because you are owner occupied, you do have availability for a large different set of grants that are administered through Bureau, as well as a separate revolving loan fund from home headquarters. If you go to the Bureau website, or if you go to homehq.org, you can find more information about both of these. There is a lot of specific owner occupied rental assistance available to you though. So obviously there are income qualifications associated with those, but there is the home headquarters loan program, which does not, I believe, have any income restrictions for homeowners. So there are those avenues available for financial assistance.
Okay. And then one other question, because I do have rentals that I do not live in. And I know like Section 8, I have a lot of Section 8 tenants. And I know in Section 8, they have like these different like parameters of like, well, is the household, does it include a child under the age of 6? Who's renting it? It sounds like here it's going to be pretty indiscriminate. Like you're just going to apply the same rules as far as like I'm gonna be honest. So one of the most important things I'm concerned about is basements and attics, and lead paint hazards there. I almost always, if it's being cited, will do a lockout agreement for Section 8, and I'm hoping that maybe that could be a resolution in these cases as well. Like I just say the tenant doesn't have access to the basement, because doing a basement remodel, oh, I feel like I just fear how much that would cost. Yeah, so basically, is there what is the parameters of, like, for instance, inspecting the basements and that kind of stuff? Would there be like similar to what Belmont and RAC do, where you can do a lockout agreement? And then very importantly, like, is there any sort of parameters on whether or not who's living there, as far as like, is it small children or if it's adults?
So we still inspect basements, and if the tenant has access to them, or attics, if the tenant has access to them. But if not, if they're locked, we would ask the landlord to let us take a look, especially in the basements where a lot of the heat and water systems are, and just to make sure they are, they're up to standards, and there's no hazard around them where it could cause a fire. Regarding children, I mean, the only time we we really look for that criteria, especially children under the age of 6, and we identify that they are living in a hazardous unit. Is what we do then is we notify Erie County Health Department. We have a referral system with them where they would automatically get notified as soon as we log it into our system, because they have better capacity and much more focused capacity when it comes to children under the age of 6 living in hazardous conditions. So that's the only criteria we see when it comes to individuals like that. But at the end of the day, we're inspecting for building code and minimal safety standards. Hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you, Mike.
Other questions if folks want to unmute and ask them?
I guess I would ask how to even approach this question. Basically, any house that was built before 1978 probably has some lead paint somewhere in it. And if a team comes in determined to find it with drills and axes and stuff, they probably could. So I guess I'm wondering what a lead inspection involves. Like, what are we looking for? Certainly not the presence of lead in the house at all, because under 20 layers of paint, there might be some, especially door sills, for example. But how many times has a door sill been painted since the 70s? Every year, probably. So I guess the question is, you know, how deep a lead inspection goes. If we could have an impression of that, then we'd be more likely to know if we're in compliance. Thank you for answering.
I see maybe Thomas preparing to respond.
Yes, I will answer the question. Again, we are looking for chipping and peeling surfaces. We're looking for our walls that are damaged, something where that if the lead paint is intact, basically it's considered relatively safe. So if something is not maintained properly, that's where the contamination can come from. So we're not going to, I know in the past when we did lead inspections, we would use an XRF, we would check the surfaces, and at times they would strip all the old woodwork out of the houses. This is going back into the 90s. Again, this is to prevent lead poisoning and for safe and healthy housing. So we're just going to we're looking for maintenance. We're looking for properties to be maintained properly where the exposure level is limited. I don't know if you could ever get all the lead out of a house. So again, we're thinking safety here, and that's the way we're going to go about the inspection.
Could you tell us more about your lead grant program?
Yes, I'm glad to answer that question. So the program is limited to households where the occupant is a family or with a child under the age of 6, either living in the home or regularly visiting the home. The tenants must be income qualified. I think it's below 80% of the area median income. And the way it works is that we contract with Belmont Housing Services that essentially acts as our on-the-ground contractor to facilitate the contract with a third-party contractor to remediate lead wherever there's a citation or a risk. So that might be window replacement, it might be reconstructing a porch, it might be door replacement. It usually involves, painting and light carpentry. The affordability period is 3 years post grant. And again, as I stated, it's the average amount we're looking to pay is $12,000, but if the work is in excess of $12,000, we have the opportunity to provide more, particularly braiding other funds. The stand-up funds that I think Mike mentioned are some new federal funds that the city has that I didn't really go into, but it's a rehab program that we could potentially braid with the lead grant. Same with the revolving loan fund, because often we find that if a property has a lead paint violation, it might not be the only thing. There might be a problem with the roof. There might be other conditions in the unit that we really want to address as well. So part of Eric's job and all of our jobs is to find different sources of funding to try to make the unit safe. And the lead grant is an important component of that. That answer, if you have any specific questions, I can certainly try to answer them as well.
I see Jen Kimura unmuted if you have a question. Or if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll be wrapping up a little early. You know, we want to give a big thank you to all of the city folks we have on this call, giving really quality information out about this new program. Appreciate you being here, and to everybody else for being on the call.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sorry to interrupt. Before we leave the meeting, can you just repeat again where the recording is going to be available?
I believe it'll be on our website. Andrea, is that the case?
PPG website?
We'll confirm with our city partners here that it's okay to post it, but what we do after the workshop is we have all your emails since you registered on Zoom, so we'll send a direct link to the video to everyone who registered.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's a good question. So we'll be sending that follow-up info with anything else that we mentioned as well. We could probably also hopefully include Hunter's slides if that's all right with Hunter. But otherwise, if you think of questions after this, you can send it to us and we'll try to get those responses back to you. Otherwise, we do have that next workshop this coming Thursday at 12. Please send people our way for that as well. And big thank you to everybody for being here, and hope to see you again in another workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.